Andrea, to the others who have joined with us. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Andrea, we met Andrea X number of years ago when we were teaching in Germany. And so we've maintained a great relationship since then. A year ago, we were out again in Germany speaking at some of the Messianic congregations there, and Andrea and crew invited us to, she just waved at you. Andrea and crew invited us to be the featured speakers at a youth conference. So they picked us old fogies for that conference. We had a real blast with them. So this is Andrea.
Hi, Andrea.
She is here with us from Stuttgart, Germany. Yeah. So she's come the longest way to be here.
She wins the
Yeah. Now, we occasionally have a couple people pipe in from the West Coast, but they have not. So that being said, I think we can go ahead, and those who haven't been able to join us, will just have to pick us up on the recording.
I have a guess.
You do have guests?
Yeah, you can't see her. She's very small. Where's the camera? Over here?
That's the camera right up.
Oh, the camera. So here, our lighting's not good, but that's Sydney Sue. And Sydney Sue is a spider made out of amber, and she comes from Russia.
Oh, that's right.
I'm sure her name there was Svetlana or something. I don't know. But she comes out at Halloween time because she's my friend. All right, we've got some questions here. Questions.
I would suggest, because
yes,
Andrea joined us from Germany, we start with that.
You want to start with hers?
Yeah, I think
you
so.
Want to identify her as the author of the couple questions here?
Well, all right, maybe we'll.
Now that we've embarrassed her. I don't care which one you start with. Start away.
Okay.
Which one do you want to start?
Well, since you turned it over to that, we'll start with that one.
Not this one. This is a long one. Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Because we dealt the other.
Because this is something I think needs to be discussed more often, and a lot of people don't consciously think about it.
That's right.
And once again, we can only speak for basic Americans. Cannot speak for any other country. In America, the average viewpoint of a Christian, in other words, if we talk to the next 100 people who are going into Target, you could interview them, and you would say, how much money did Yeshua and the disciples have? What economic class would you put them in? And I think the number one answer is going to be they were poor. How many think that would be your average answer? They were poor.
And I might add that is the most common answer that you will get even within the Messianic community. And from brief periods of time we've had to interact with people abroad, it's a very common misperception abroad as well as America.
Okay, so I'm going to give you the first example that might be brought up about how we know that they don't have any money. Supposedly they're poor. The birth story, where they don't have Miriam does not have enough money to bring a big offering, and so she offers turtle loves pigeons, whatever. And that shows that was a poor person's offering, quote unquote, which, and I'm even going to question exactly where that comes from. The idea that an option in a sacrifice would determines whether you're poor or rich. I would just ask questions about that, because I don't think once we get to adult Yeshua and the disciples and what was available to them, I think you still have this in the back of their mind that they don't have any money. Okay, go ahead. Did you have any anything to add?
Were you going to add further? Were you going to add further on why the offering and the food?
No, I wasn't,
okay.
because I don't have an answer right off the top of my head, but you can go ahead.
All right. As Patrice was talking, a couple of things popped into my mind. First of all, that is the common assumption that's made, that because of that offering, they must have been poor.
No, it proves it.
Oh, it proves, yeah.
And they can't get a hotel room.
Right, they didn't, yeah, that's right, and they couldn't afford a hotel room. Well, please remember, as far as that story is concerned, I'm going to go hop in a couple different places here. As far as that story is concerned, they were going to visit family. When they arrived, the family did not have room. There was, as it says, no room in the inn. It wasn't an innkeeper. There was just no room in the guest room of their family. Someone had already occupied it. And the way, as you put the two stories together, it appears what happened is it was too late for the family members to displace the person in the guest room. But
Too late at night.
Too late at night, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But anybody who was a family member who was in the guest room would certainly, when they realized there was an infant aboard, would have freely relinquished the room. So they ended up in the guest room very quickly thereafter, and that's where you see them in effect when the Magi arrive.
Yeah, women in labor. I think that takes precedent over any other excuse you might have to sleep in the big bed. However, I'm just going to say something a woman would automatically think of that men theologians never think of. That childbirth is a very, very messy proposition. It's disgusting how messy it is. If you have a guest room, you do not want to give birth in the guest room. You want to give birth back where you have a straw floor and where you have a water supply. So I'm just going to throw that in there because I've never seen anybody discuss this topic ever. Go ahead.
And in fact, now that you mentioned it, I will have to add that to my notes for one of the last couple classes of this semester's Jewish Roots and Foundations of Scripture, when we talk about a re-examination of the birth narratives. So, and in that, and I'm not going to get into it here, in that we will also discuss the issue that where they ended up in what is called the manger was actually within the house. We have ourselves been privileged to see one of those kind of structures because one of our friends happened to buy a house just outside downtown Jerusalem, and as they were building their house, they found this structure down below, which is where they would have kept the animals. So it was not a cave, it was not a manger as in an outdoor stall of some sort. It was part of the house. It was one of the floors below the house. But enough about that. Joseph, Papa Joseph, he was not just a carpenter. The way in which the texts are constructed indicate he was more of a contractor. Now, if he's a contractor, he is probably not a poor dude. The next part of it.
He would be called middle class.
Yes, he would be called middle class. And then as the story expands, frequently we're told that the disciples were very poor people. They were fishermen, and that's how they managed to keep their lives afloat, so to speak. And all of that's true, but the implications are totally upside down. They were fishermen.
The fisherman part. Yeah. That's true.
That's the part that's true. So, a very quick review and another commercial. We'll discuss this in more detail in the spring semester for the Jewish Roots and Foundations of Scripture course, part 2. But anyhow, fishermen. A quick summary of the fishing industry in the ancient Roman Empire. Fishing was one of the major industries of the empire. There is I think it's 7-volume ancient encyclopedia coming out of this time period called The Learned Banquet, or if you want to put it, maybe Wise Eating. One whole volume of that set of encyclopedias is devoted to the fishing industry. That's how important it was. And its importance is further emphasized by the fact that you have all kinds of fishing villages around the edge of what is often called the Sea of Galilee, but it's really a lake. And we have found the remnants of close to a dozen and a half. I think the last number was 16 of these fishing villages. And as we have been able to unearth these villages, we have found that they were really nice places, quite fancy, so to speak. And at the center of this sort of arc around the lake called Gennesaret, Sea of Galilee, there was a village that turns out to be the fish factory. Its name literally means the fish factory, and you will know of it as Magdala, as in from where Mary came. Now, one beautiful synagogue's been found there. We had the opportunity the last couple of times we've study tours to Israel to actually visit the remains of that synagogue. It shows how well off these fishing people were, because it's a major industry in the empire, and in fact there's a fish factory to cure the fish so that they could be further distributed throughout the empire as cured, dried, salted fish. Fish was the prominent meal of the ancient Roman Empire. So these dudes had money to spare. In fact, as you read the stories, they had as employers, they had employees. They could step out of active participation in it to become Yeshua's disciples. And there are some other archaeological discoveries that we've found as well concerning the nature of these villages that indicate that these were definitely not poor people, definitely middle class. That means that they were quite well off and also very well educated.
I was going to add that, which meant that the children of these families would be extremely well educated. They were not required to work in the family business while they were still children, possibly up till puberty. So the family, if they had to afford it, if they to get their children education, they didn't have a money problem with that. They also wouldn't have had a problem if it was free. Any child could go and get educated at the synagogue or the synagogue schools. When they dug up, they're continuing to dig up Magdala. I think they found now a dozen synagogues there in town, which is just north of Tiberias. So if you've ever been to Israel and you've traveled from Tiberias north, you've driven right by it, you would not know it until they dug it up, which they started doing about 15 years ago. Yes, and some people say, well, there were those rich women who used to follow them around and feed them. So that shows that they didn't have any food. If these women rich women didn't get it for them. No, it was the privilege of those women to get them their food. It was not because they were starving. It was because that was their service. And they did accompany. Any time you have an impression where it was Yeshua and 12 guys wandering around, that would be more like Robin Hood. That would not be the Yeshua story. Yeshua had quite a crowd following. It included women. And it's mentioned a couple times that the women who accompanied them provided something or other in a story. And that would be normal behavior for people who were following an itinerant rabbi around the country. That would be a normal posse that Yeshua would have. So there are indications just from what we've talked about, and there's other things I could have thrown in, but I stifled. I know, but we can't go on and on that long. But just the impression that they were. Oh, Yeshua says, birds have nests, and I forget the exact quote, but I don't have a place to lay my head. That doesn't mean he's poor. That whole topic that he's discussing there, which I'm not sure exactly where it is, one of the Gospels.
I was going to say it's in the Gospel.
It's in the Gospel. Thank you, mister. You'd be the one who knows. That doesn't mean he's poor. It means he's followed by hundreds of people. He's followed around by hundreds of people. And it's a very intrusive love for him. He can't get off by himself. He can't rest because the people have needs. And once again, he knows why he is there, which is, I know the obvious answer, but he's also there to provide people's needs, to work for people's needs, and to teach people whenever they need to be taught. So that has nothing to do with the amount of money in the treasury or the sack of money. Let's not even get into who was handling the sack of money. That's a whole other theological topic that we don't want to get into. So why are we discussing this? It's important that people do not follow Yeshua because he's poor and downtrodden. Yeshua was not poor and downtrodden. That's not how you should identify him if you feel yourself that you yourself are poor and downtrodden. That's very nice. How did we get this continual impression? And I think, at least in America, I would track it back to the Depression era in the 1930s. I would track it back to how Yeshua was talked about in churches and described to the people, and continues in children's materials where they never have anything nice, where we maybe would prefer morally that he had like cloaks that were all, coming apart, or I don't know what the glory is in that part, other than, oh, look, he was oppressed. Yes, he was oppressed, but that doesn't mean he didn't have any money. Another indication that he was not poor was at the very end of his life, when he's going to be executed. There are 2 Roman soldiers there. And as he's or right after he is nailed to the wood, the 2 soldiers are portrayed as gambling over his cloak. His cloak is a technical term in Greek for his main garment, not his undergarments. Somebody thought recently that these people did not wear undergarments. No, they wore undergarments. These are not kilts in Scotland. I can't speak for the Scottish people, but they had an undergarment of some kind, and then they put a main garment over it. And Yeshua's main garment was valuable. It was so valuable that both of the soldiers wanted it, and they gambled over it, because whoever had the high roll of the, I guess, like runes, let's call them runes for now, would win the cloak, which, when it was used, it was cut. In other words, it would be cut if it was used. If it was not cut, it was original owner. And so evidently it was the original owner from Yeshua. So there are indications that only if we understood Jewish times and culture and archaeology and other studies in the Gospels, it's such a good portrait in the Gospels, but people tended to concentrate or were hit more by he's poor and bedraggled like me, so he can identify with my problem. Okay, but that may not necessarily be exactly accurate. And there are other good things that come from not seeing him as, basically a beggar. I think if he looked like a beggar, I don't think Pilate would have even talked to him. I think Pilate had better things to do than to talk to raggedy people. And yet that's the impression that we get, usually. So please do not feel sorry for them on that account. You can feel sorry for Yeshua and the apostles for different reasons. Don't feel sorry for them because they're poor. And please don't identify with them. If that's the only way you can identify, they're poor like me. Okay, not sure where that gets you anymore. Here's me. Anymore. I'm tired of people who play the "oh, poor, pitiful me" card. I'm tired of that. I mean, as far as the scriptures go. Oh, poor, pitiful me. Really? It depends on the story. It depends on where we're at in the scriptures, but just take it a step back, I would say. You have anything more to say on that?
Yeah, a couple of things you mentioned I want to flip back onto very briefly. Number one, no place to lay my head. And it also ties in with the apostles, disciples, whatever you want to call them. And that is, now that you've come to understand that Yeshua was not some poor, bedraggled beggar of any kind, when he says, I have no place to lay my head, he's indicating his commitment to the task in front of him.
There's no rest for the weary, he would say.
Yeah, no rest for the weary. That's how committed he was, even though he had the funds to pick up his dad's business or whatever else. He was so committed to his mission and his message, and that's what we need to see in that part of the Yeshua story, his commitment. That kind of commitment was also displayed by then his followers, because they left these profitable businesses behind. They were able to leave them in other people's hands, but they also left them behind in order to follow Yeshua. So they paid the cost of what is often called discipleship. But I want to expand that a bit because yes, it is discipleship, but not as often understood. As Patrice mentioned, Yeshua was a traveling rabbi. So when he said no place to lay my head, that was an indicator of the nature of his task. The rabbis of those days were frequently traveling rabbis, and they had traveling schools with them. The disciples were students, rabbinic students in this rabbinic school by this very well-known now rabbi. And so they paid a cost, so to speak, to follow him. Because if they were going to follow him and their businesses were to remain intact, they would have to hire somebody else to fill their role, the roles that they would have had in a hands-on way for their businesses to continue to operate. But how do we know they continued to operate? What was one of the first things that happened after the resurrection? John chapter 21, they said, well, let's go fishing. Well, I'm sorry, your business has been sold. No, the business hasn't been sold. It is still there for you. So that's one thing to say about Yeshua's commitment as well as the apostolic commitment. And please remember that at times Yeshua set aside a specific group of 12. He set aside a specific group of 70 or 72, depending on which of the manuscripts you follow the route. And there were at least 120 of those disciples in the what's called the upper room in Acts chapter 1. When he ascended, we're told there were 500 that were gathered that actually saw him. That wasn't the whole of his following. So as you think about it, it wasn't just this group of poor people who were following him. Second point is this, the women that Patrice brought up. Two things need to be said about them. One, they had their own wealth that they could contribute to the cause, and they did. Number two, they went around with him. If they went around with him, then guess what they were? They were disciples.
They were listening. They weren't just washing up in the kitchen. They were camping, and they were listening. So this picture of one guy standing and 12 guys sitting on the ground is in a certain way, it's ridiculous. That is so not what the scenario was. Think of a camping trip with a bunch of people where you're portable, but you could be working on stuff. You could be stoking the fire. You could be off doing things. But if you were within earshot, you were listening and learning along with everybody else.
And in fact, so they were part of the traveling group. They were part of the school of, I was going to say disciples, actually school of rabbinic students. They were part of that. And in fact, you can see a term that is used in some of the early rabbinic literature to describe disciples. You see it used to describe Mary and Martha in the Gospel of Luke. When she sat at the feet of Yeshua, that was the place where disciples or where students or where rabbinic students sat. So that Luke is very clearly indicating that she was one of those who was part of this group. So when people think that it's only men who followed Yeshua,
or only men got taught,
or only
and
men,
there's no women.
Yeah.
There's no women ever involved. That's why it cracks me up about the Last Supper. Do you think there were no women there? I know that's what the picture shows.
The picture. I mean, I counted the people in the picture. No,
I know that's what the picture shows. Except, who cooked this dinner? Did they hire a chef? Somebody cooked dinner. And he talks about his mom at one point. He makes some remarks about his mom. Don't you think his mom is there? Wouldn't you assume mom is there? I would assume it. I know he talks about, I have to hate my father and mother, and he's not talking about dinner. He's not talking about celebrating the Passover. That's a family occasion. He can have the boys. They're having it in a place that they're renting or borrowing for the evening, because once again, it's a night or two before the rest of Jerusalem is going to be celebrating Passover. Mom's there. She's not going to eat the Last Supper without him, or she's not going to let him eat the Last Supper without her. Just because it's not mentioned doesn't mean that there's nobody there. And I think some of this picturing of the 12 of them being separate and alone, and just being all by themselves, all alone together, all by themselves, is just, it's ludicrous, really. This is not how Jewish life is conducted.
It's a very important point. If you ask the question, then why weren't they mentioned? Because
it was obvious that they'd be there.
That's the whole point. The authors of the Gospels would say, are you that dumb that you don't know Jewish custom, Jewish culture? Of course the family would have been present. Duh. Or
they would have had reasons.
Yeah. So the lack of mention is nothing other than the fact that the authors assumed that the readers would know what the story looked like, because they were familiar with Judaism, Jewish culture, and Jewish religion at that time.
In that sense, I think are we almost done with this topic?
Yeah,
I just wanted to give a shout out to Luke.
Okay.
Whenever I think of a woman in a story or a woman talking, guess where I find it? Always in Luke. Luke is the great, he interviews the women in Yeshua's life. It's obvious that he interviewed Miriam, mom, he interviewed her in depth, because there are certain things he puts in the gospel that nobody else would have known except for Miriam. I know in theory that when the Spirit comes down on a gospel writer, the Spirit reveals all the things the gospel writer is saying. Yes, but he also interviewed these women, or he talked to people who were there when something happened. And so Luke is a great booster of women. It's almost embarrassing how many women he has in the gospel. I'm surprised no one has complained about it. It could be that the theologians just skip over that part too, and they just go, well, this is good stuff. I'm not going to discuss how Luke knows this, other than the Spirit came upon him. All right, what's next, dear? You want to, all right, so which part of it? You want the place? I know.
I would do.
So here's the two parts of it. You've got the Romans 11, issue with Romans 11 and Jewish evangelism.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that what you'd like to?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll do both parts, but we can start there.
Okay.
You want to sort of paint the background of the question?
All right. So we have a question about. I didn't print out the actual. I have half the actual question. So what I'm going to summarize and possibly truncate the question, which is, what's the deal with Jewish evangelism? Because after all, I read Romans 11, and in Romans 11 it says all Israel will be saved. So we could just move on to people on distant islands that have never heard the gospel. What's the need for Jewish evangelism? Actually, we got why do you need to do that question back in the 1970s. We got it from several different people.
Yeah, it was why we were in first and second grade.
Yeah.
I'm teasing. In the 70s.
Why do you need to? We live in America. Anybody can, hear the gospel whenever they want. They just turn on the radio and there's the gospel. So, why aren't you doing more important, population centers? And Romans 11 does say all Israel will be saved. But the question is, when? When will that happen?
And also how?
And how? So, Mr. New Testament person.
Okay, first of all, context of Romans 11. The verse that Patrice is mentioning is verse 26. So guess what? Hang on to your seats here, fasten your seatbelts, or raise your tray tables, or whatever else the saying goes. Here's something shocking. There are 25 verses in Romans 11 before you get to verse 26. There's a context that's involved here. Oh, and guess what? Romans 11 is set in a larger context of Romans 9 to 11. Now, so there is some material that informs us concerning Romans 11. And in Romans 11, it talks about how those who are not part of the Jewish community, they're viewed as wild olive trees, or part of a wild olive tree, whereas the Jewish community is viewed as a natural olive tree. And the rabbi there argues that those who are Gentiles are like branches that are taken out of a wild olive tree, grafted into the natural olive tree. So he says, by the way, please remember then not to be prideful or boastful, because it's not you who support the tree, it's the tree that supports you. And then it acknowledges along the way that there are some among the Jewish people who had difficulty understanding this. I'm going to steal somebody else's either book title or phrasing. That the Jews had difficulty understanding this olive tree message of Yeshua. Well, the rabbi, as he writes in Romans 11, I'm not going to unfold the whole of it for you. He says, yeah, for those who had trouble understanding, there's coming a time when they too will find their full place within this olive tree. And he summarizes it by saying, all Israel will be saved. Now,
I have Romans 11 here.
oh, okay, if you already got it there, then I won't have to hunt it up. Where is verse 26? On the next page. Verse 26, and in this way all Israel will be saved. That's not where the verse ends. There's a biblical text that's quoted thereafter, and it gives you the hint as to when this will take place. It says, the deliverer or the liberator will come from Zion, will turn godlessness away from Jacob, and this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Now, he's quoted two different texts as I'm reading that. One is Isaiah 59, one is Jeremiah either 31 or 33, depending on which version of this quote you're going to use. Has the deliverer, as pictured here, come to Zion? Well, yes, in a way he has. But the way in which it's used in Isaiah 59 and the way in which it is now used in our Rosh Chodesh celebrations or New Month celebrations is it anticipates the time when the one who is the son of David comes to establish his rule over Jerusalem, in Jerusalem and over Israel and the world. Now, last time I checked, even though Yeshua has come once, that descriptor is not fulfilled. So that is telling us that the time will come when he returns, that all Israel will recognize him, even the ones who hadn't recognized him up to that point. So that's the when of it. Now that means there is a incentive for us, a motivation for us, in the meantime, to be effectively living the message of Yeshua, as well as attractively communicating his message. And that involves to the Jewish people, which is part of the reason why we have Messianic Jewish synagogues. The main reason we have Messianic Jewish synagogues is so that people who are part of this Messianic Jewish community can have a place to express themselves Messianically Jewishly. That means, that's why I call them synagogues. We are synagogues, we're not churches. We're part of the Jewish faith, culture, tradition, religion, whichever term you want to use. And as part of that, Jewish people can come and say, oh, how cool, how nice. Two things before I move on from this part, and that is, number one, the understanding I'm spelling out for you is built into one of the classic Torah texts. It's Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 5 to 8. And there Moses encourages the people of Israel, to follow God's guidelines in such a way that when people look at what they're doing and how they're living, people from around the nations of the world will say, oh, what a wise and understanding people this is. Because two things, they have a God so near to them that he hears and answers prayer, and two, they have guidelines and instructions as wise and valuable as these. In other words, we're supposed to live in such a way by following God's guidelines so that the lifestyles we have are attractive. That's part of what it's supposed to be in a Messianic Jewish synagogue. That's part of what it is for anybody as they live their lives before others in the world. And in the Deuteronomy context, it very clearly has to do with living Jewishly. That doesn't mean everyone has to live Jewishly, but Jews certainly should be living Jewishly. And there are others among us, and including those who are part of this group here, who as non-Jews have decided to attach themselves to the Jewish community. And the early Messianic Jews in Jerusalem addressed the issue of how is that supposed to take place, and they built on how it took place in previous generations in Judaism, going all the way back to the time of the group that left with the Israelites when they left Egypt, to those who joined even before they went down to Egypt because of the hospitality of Abraham and Sarah, and in fact the foundation that goes all the way back to Noah. And now I very quickly summarize several lectures from the last 4 classes from the Jewish Roots and Foundations course, and there's much more to be unfolded there. So all of that to provide the background for when, and all of that to provide the background for the importance, the significance of continuing to live that kind of a lifestyle in front of all people, but yes, in front of Jewish people. And in fact, Yeshua, as much as instructed his followers to do exactly that in what's often called the Great Commission. It's found in 3 places. The one that's most frequently cited is Matthew 28. Actually, there's a version of it in Acts chapter 1. You can find it in Luke as well, but we simply focus on the 2 that I mentioned, Matthew 28 and Acts chapter 1. Matthew 28 usually is translated. Oh yeah, Mark 16 also addresses it. So it's in 4 places. So, and if I keep thinking, I might find more. But anyhow, in Matthew, it's often translated, go into all the world and share this message, if I might translate far more literally and contextually. That's not what the text says if you examine it grammatically. It says, as you go, implying wherever you go, teach, make disciples, teach those with whom you interact and come into contact. It's not an instruction that you're to go someplace. It's an instruction that wherever you go, this should be part of the process. There needs to be a communication process. And that communication process will only work effectively if the attraction process is in place that causes the response from Deuteronomy 4. Wow, I love what's going on here. How do I get in on this? And just to let us know that there was a important Jewish component to this, Acts chapter 1 indicates where they're supposed to begin. They're supposed to begin in Jerusalem and go throughout Israel, but not just limited there. So yes, even though there's coming a time when all Israel will be saved, will be restored, will be part of the wonderful package of God, That happens when Yeshua comes back with the ultimate liberation and restoration when he returns. In the meantime, we've got a job to do. We say as we close our services on a regular basis with the remaining, our calling is our task. This is our calling. This is our task. Doesn't mean we knock on doors. It doesn't mean we hand out leaflets, although some people have chosen to do that. It means we live a life that's attractive enough to cause comment, positive comment, and interaction that says, tell me more about what's going on here. I'm interested.
Absolutely. I could say about 5 other things, but I'm not going to. No, I'm not going to because, time goes on. TikTok.
Okay.
TikTok.
The other part of the question.
Oh, the other part of the question. Okay. Let me just say one thing. Back in the 1970s, when people asked us this, they had different reasons for asking this because, once again, they thought that America had been totally, the gospel had been preached 100%. The gospel had been preached 100%, and it was continuing to be preached in America. Any dope can find out the gospel if they want to. But here's what they didn't realize, and in a certain way, we didn't realize when we first got involved.
Not as much as we do now.
Not as much, obviously, not as much as we do now. Is, and I'm going to say something not to this group because this is like the choir. In fact, we should be having a choir rehearsal or something.
Oh, yeah. She's talking about preaching to the choir.
Preaching to the choir. Preaching to the choir. Here's what Jewish people don't want. Here's what they don't want. They don't want to be Christians. They don't want to be Christians. Why? Are they prejudiced? Do they hate Christianity so much? Yeah, they're pretty unhappy with Christianity. Yeah. What? What did Yeshua do? Oh, it's not Yeshua. They like him pretty good. In Israel, they like him pretty good. They like his.
They think he's a good guy.
They think his friends are pretty good. Here's what they don't like: the activity of Christianity down through the centuries. They don't like it at all. And there's a bunch of quotes that we both know. Christianity speaks so loud I can't hear the voice of its founder, which they would assume is Yeshua. I had a professor who said, and nothing against professors, he was just repeating what he'd been taught. And because nobody questioned him, he kept on saying it because it's sort of witty in a certain way. He says, yes, so this was a Jewish movement until Paul fell off his horse and invented Christianity.
Bumped his head,
invented Christianity. Do you know what he's referring to there? The road to Emmaus.
Damascus.
I'm sorry. Yes, you're right, Damascus. I never talk about the New Testament. Then I forget all my basic vocabulary words.
Or geography.
Damascus, Rav Shaul and the road to Damascus, where he saw the light out of heaven and fell off his horse and invented Christianity, except he didn't invent Christianity, did he? No. But see, this is a problem. So if you are among a group that says, everybody needs to accept the gospel, everybody's got to have the gospel, everybody needs to know the gospel, of course, everybody who hears it is going to accept it, except people who don't want to be Christians. And that would be Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, and anybody else who follows something that's not Christianity. But where is the problem? There's a problem. It's a problem, isn't it? It's a problem that the gospel has been so muddied by actual Christians. The gospel's not clear. And the gospel, when it's preached or talked about, sometimes uses vocabulary that does not communicate whatsoever to anybody outside the club. So we used to joke about this when we talked in Sunday school classes. Everyone wants to be saved. Yeah, but what does that mean to the average person on the street? They want to save at the grocery store? Sure, they want to save, but what does it mean? So they're using in-group communication and vocabulary that doesn't communicate at all. So even though people may think, well, it's so easy to hear the gospel in America, actually, and this has gotten worse over the years, it's really hard to hear the gospel. Just because a preacher is talking doesn't mean you're understanding or you even want to understand what they're saying. So there's a lot of miscommunication, and it many times it isn't done very well at all. It isn't done very well. And another thing that John and I discovered was Jewish people do not want to become Christians, and guess what? They don't have to. What? They don't have to. I didn't say anything about Yeshua in that whole statement. They don't want to become Christians. It's not attractive to them. They don't want to go worship in a church. Now, do we know Jewish Messianic Jews who did start going to churches and being happy there? Yes, including his parents. But let's not say that that's the optimum thing you should do. Moshe Rosen, who was the founder of Jews for Jesus, had a story he used to tell when he used to visit churches and speak to them. And basically it was, I'm a nice Jewish guy from New York City, and I started going to churches, and I didn't even know what kind of people they were because they seemed so weird. So even though we like to think that, the congregation I go to is it accepts everybody and everybody can get along there because, after all, we're all the same at heart. Yeah, that doesn't work either. We're not all the same at heart. We do not talk about all the same topics. We do not agree on many different kinds of things, including what kind of snacks we should have. And that would be the first problem. What kind of beverages should we offer? That would be no, because culture. Because different places have different culture. And within a place in America, you could visit 14 kinds of churches and they would each conduct things differently, and they would each have a different culture. And not one of these 14 churches would do anything that's Jewish, that would identify a person as Jewish. In fact, they tend to want to not encourage that at all. But some of what the Messianic movement brought into the discussion is it's important for everyone to know that a Jew can believe in Yeshua and still be Jewish and not go to a church necessarily, and not cling to the Pope, and not do, and communion is coming up, and not do the communion that these churches do, which is not an identifiable thing for most Jewish people. They're going, what are you doing? What? So that's part of our journey that we went through together in the early 1970s. So answering the question about the gospel and the Jewish people, we always have to keep that in the forefront of our mind. As a matter of fact, I will say, I can't speak for him, even though he's the president of the Union of Messianic Congregations, which is an international body. I can't speak for him, but I will say that at the beginning, in the 1970s, due to the group of us looking around, and we were in the Chicago area. It wasn't like we were in a small town in Kansas or something. We're in the city of Chicago, where nobody is more ethnic conscious and more positive about, this is our Polish neighborhood, and this is our Chinese neighborhood, and this is our Jewish neighborhood, which was breaking apart and going out to the suburbs, than Chicago. And we realized there was nothing to draw Jewish people to Yeshua on a congregational level at all, because all the congregations were doing things that were seen as non-Jewish and sometimes anti-Jewish. So that wouldn't be a good look if you're trying to reach out to Jewish people. I forgot where I was going with that, but
you pop
something else in his mind. This is how we were.
The other thing that most people are not familiar with, and it's what something you reflected on very early in this part of the discussion, and that is because we're living in the Western world, everyone must have heard the Gospels, the gospel message, or however, or about Yeshua, whatever way you want to describe it. And as Patrice intimated in one of the quotes she shared, that's not the case, certainly for the Jewish community. The Jewish community, down through the years, has never, or almost never, had a clear presentation, a clear, accurate presentation, a clear, compelling, and attractive presentation of Yeshua. The news, if presented properly, would be fresh news. It's not as if this stuff has been, as the saying often goes, it's not as if the gospel has been preached to Jewish people, or it's available because they live in the Western world. No, that's not the case, because the actions of Christians down through the ages, unfortunately, have clouded that message, as Patrice indicated. Now, again, when we talk about that, it does not mean that we go out knocking on doors. When we talk about it, we talk about a life that we live that's attractive to the people that we would like to become part of this wonderful community. And let me close my part of this by saying there's an excellent book that I use in a couple of my classes, written by a very well-known Jewish scholar, and he's titled it simply, The Jewish Gospels. And they are. But for them to be heard clearly, and certainly within the Jewish community, they need to be presented as Jewish Gospels. And so our message is as a Messianic Jewish synagogue.
So true.
Okay.
Did you want me to talk about
Yes.
this other thing? So this other part of this question has to do with what's being said in Matthew 27:25. I'll look it up. Matthew 27:25, which John and I will agree, this is the first time we have ever heard this verse being used in this way. Not that that means it's wrong. It's just like we were like, what? Excuse me, what? Okay. So Matthew,
I might say, and we love the way it's used, even if we find out that it's not the accurate interpretation of this.
No, I mean,
it's still a wonderful.
This interpretation would be very helpful.
Yes.
If we can go with it. Okay. So where was it? 27:25. A lot of you know this. All right. So this is where you have the crowd, and I'm using that word advisedly. The crowd is interacting with Pilate about the status of Yeshua, who's a prisoner. And remember, first of all, let us be very clear. We can't go into all the background, but believe us when we tell you, you can go see this area where this occurred in Jerusalem. You have to go underground. You have to go underground at a convent in the Muslim quarter. Oh, I guess that's the Christian quarter. In the Christian quarter, you have to go in a specific convent, and you have to go under the ground about 2 layers to get to Roman Jerusalem layer. And when you get there and you see it, they will tell you this is where the crowd gathered to early that morning of, most people say Thursday, but don't get into that either. Friday morning? Yeah, is that when they had that all took place on Friday?
No, that's what, I think that's what.
Right, Thursday would be the, yeah. We're talking about what they say, we don't say this, but.
Yeah.
Okay, so Friday. Remember, it's at dawn. The city is full of visitors because Passover is one of those holidays where you do go to Jerusalem to celebrate with whatever family you've got there. And but at this hour of the morning, Pilate is doing this early in the day because he doesn't have room for a big crowd. And so instead of thousands of people calling crucify him, which is what you see in the Mel Gibson movie, you see this thousands of people crying crucify him in the one that was done by Mark Burnett, who people just think he's great, and his Bible story films are on TV. He's a TV producer who produced Touched by an Angel, and he went on to do other Bible stories. They're both dead wrong. Do not believe this viewpoint that there were thousands of people there, Jews all angry, yelling, screaming, crucify him. If you go and see that space, you'll see. If there were 100 people there, they'd all be cramped and couldn't move. So this is a tiny group of people by our standards, especially by, if you want to compare it to Sunday, previous Sunday, when Yeshua would have come in through the gates on the donkey. Now we're talking thousands of people. But that morning, for that judgment in front of Pilate's home, the courtyard in front of his home, 100 people couldn't fit there. So this picture of thousands of Jews screaming, crucify him, it's wrong. And I will guarantee you it's anti-Semitic. Did the filmmakers intend for it to be anti-Semitic? No. But anti-Semitism can still go on, even though people don't intend it. Do you see how it's different from 100 people yelling this in a city of possibly, well, it's going to be a couple hundred thousand, yeah. Maybe 75,000 on a non-holiday day, to between thousands of people yelling it and 100 people? See how that's different? See how the ramifications of that moment are different? The portrayal show the context is the meaning. The context is the meaning of that speech act. What crucify him is termed as, within linguistics, it's a speech act. It's an action based on words. So they're saying crucify him. Pilate has all power. He's not afraid of 100 people. Some people feel bad for Pilate. Some preachers feel bad. Well, he was just in a horrible situation. We all understand it. The crowd would have rioted and come. That wasn't like that. We know from other historical documents that Pilate was cruel. Just be cruel. He enjoyed cruelty. He loved pushing these people around. He loved to own them Jews. Is that fair enough to say? He couldn't wait to be in power and tell them what they want. So, crucify them. I'm now on Matthew 27:24. When Pilate saw he was getting nowhere, what is it that Pilate's getting nowhere? He wants to exchange Barabbas, a criminal he has, for Yeshua. He wants to put Barabbas to death, and he wants Yeshua to go free. Okay. What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate, but they shouted all the louder, all 100, crucify him. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. He's washing his hands symbolically. I'm having nothing to do with this decision. I'm out of the ramifications of this decision. You're doing what you want to do. Once again, he's not being a victim. He is perpetrating a fraud. He has all power. He has all power to put to death who he wants to put to death and to save who he wants to save. He doesn't want to be involved in this decision on purpose, not because he's afraid. I'm innocent of this man's blood, he said. It is your responsibility. All the people answer, all 100, his blood is on us and on our children. So he released Barabbas to them, which meant he let Barabbas go. But he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Sorry, Yeshua.
Close enough.
And by the way, Mel Gibson is wrong about the nature of that flogging also. That was totally not what was done. It was in Mel Gibson's mind, and it's in the nun's story that he took his whole plot line from. Mel Gibson did not go to the Bible to find out what happened. He went to a nun's story, a German nun, Southern Germany, in the 1800s, who had a vision of all these things that actually happened, which she wrote down, and you can find it on the internet. It's been translated for free. You can read. It's like a little novelette, her impressions of what happened. But back to his blood is on us and on our children. So evidently, by this new understanding of this, that means they took on, this 100 people took on themselves the punishment, and therefore Jews are not punished anymore?
That somehow Yeshua's blood or his death covers the Jewish people of that time and succeeding times. And so then the implication would be then there's no need to extend to them the message about Yeshua, because they're already covered by his death, by what he had done. Did I get that right?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Now, we have always taken it, because we've taken it, we have not done a lot of, you can imagine, I've now started the same sentence 4 times.
Okay, try again.
You can imagine that neither I nor John would enjoy a study trip into what people have said about this verse that says, his blood is on us and on our children. I don't even want to imagine sermons that have been preached on this topic, because I'm sure the sermons are actually much worse than I have in my mind, because I have never been guilty of overestimating the amount of anti-Semitism that is in some people's Christianity. But this has been used as a convenient excuse to say that the Jewish people committed the unforgivable sin when they had Yeshua crucified. You will get a lot of agreement from a lot of surprising people. Is this one of the unforgivable sins? This demanding of Yeshua's death when he had done no wrong. And if even now you're thinking, yeah, what's up with that? Let's get back to that in a minute. However, you need to also, and I'm just going to, well, I don't have notes in this particular version of the Bible. This is for teenagers, and so they didn't think this was important to make a note about. Someone says these exact words way before this crowd. Let this be on me. Let the punishment for this fall on me. And you'll be surprised when I tell you, try to think of all the characters in Bible times. Go way back, go into the Torah, go into Genesis, Exodus, just go through. Who might this have been said by, and you'll never get it?
No, it's not
no sense. It's a fruitless task. Someone you know, but you don't know that she said this. Rebecca. And when did she say this phrase? Well, she said it to Jacob. When did she say this phrase to Jacob? Right before he goes in to deceive his father. With the whole get-up on, remember? He wore a get-up. He says, look it up on your own in Genesis. He says, I don't feel good about this, mother. This is not a good thing we're doing here. Well, how does she respond? Let the punishment be mine. Let the punishment be mine. So, Rebecca, not someone I associate with punishment. Do you? Seen as a glorious, wonderful person all through her story. That's why she gets chosen. Eliezer chooses her because she's outstanding in her life without even needing to be outstanding. And yet she says, do it, son, and I'll take the blame. Was she ever punished for that?
Either by Isaac or by God.
I don't see anything about Rebecca's getting faulted for this. That's a whole other story. But I just want to point out that when this phrase is much closer in the Greek and Hebrew than it is in the English translations, is repeated here in this scene. Don't you think that might have been an important thing for people reading this to get? By the way, dear reader, this exact sentiment was repeated by Rebecca before she said, go to Jacob and get the blessing. Go and get the blessing. Remember, for Jacob and for Rebecca, the important thing is not the deception, it's get the blessing. Get the blessing. It'll be a disaster if Esau gets the blessing. It'll be a disaster. Everything will go down the tubes. God's will was for Jacob to get the blessing directly from his father, which is what he proceeded to do. So, how does that apply to the group of people here who are begging for Barabbas to be given up and Yeshua to go to death? Well, how does Yeshua see it? Is he blaming the crowd? Is he saying, yeah, and it was those people, I wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for them? Is that what he says when he's dying? He says what? Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Did he not say that? Who exactly is he talking about if he's not talking about this crowd and the Romans who are gabbling for his cloak? Is he talking about these people sitting around there, yelling there? Yes. And did God forgive them, or did they commit the unforgivable sin? If God did not forgive the people that Yeshua was begging him to forgive in his last moments on earth, then I don't think you and I can hold our head up and ask to be forgiven for anything. That's how important what Yeshua says is. So I'm just going to take a stab in the dark and say, yes, God did forgive them. Is that fair enough? Is it heretical yet? Did I get heretical yet? Not quite.
Yeah.
Okay. Since God forgave the people who put Yeshua to death, does that guilt and that sin continue on down through the centuries on the Jewish people? Because you'll find a lot of agreement within Christian circles that yes, it does. Reason for the Holocaust? Well, they killed Yeshua. Okay, did we skip the part on the cross where he says, Father, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing? Where'd that end up? That was ripped out of the scroll?
Yeah.
St. Augustine. People love St. Augustine. He's horrific to the Jewish people. He says they're doomed to wander the earth with no home because they committed the sin of killing Yeshua. Once again, you have to remind yourself of the verse. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Now, is there any moment when we hear anything, God having any opinion about Augustine and what he said? Because guess what? That's been a major tenet of certain areas of Christianity down through the centuries. That the Jews are doomed to wander because they committed the unforgivable sin. This is among Christianity. This is within Christianity. And Augustine is not just a nobody who ever heard of him. He's a major theologian for many parts of Christianity. So, I didn't mean to bring you all down, but I think we do have to be careful when we hear things. And I do this, so I will now confess a sin. So I'm hearing a very good speaker. I'm enjoying what they're saying. I'm getting stuff out of it. It doesn't have to be spiritual, just anybody. Oh yeah, I'm enjoying his speech, his great speech. I'm learning stuff, getting stuff out of it, being made, wiser. And it might be sad news, but it's good for me. I need to hear sad news. I need to hear opposite opinions. It's fine. So I commit the sin of I'm nodding along until they say something that's 100% wrong, and I forget to stop nodding, and I'm going, takes me a few minutes, and then I go, oh no, I was so swept up in the moment, I forgot these verses in the Bible. So let's not be like that. And I think also we are going to need more theologians who are willing to step out and go, Augustine, who's so great and so important, he was wrong. He was really wrong in this area. And it's not just, theoretically wrong. We all make mistakes. Move along. Oh no, this mistake has ramifications. This mistake became satanic. When it's applied, as Christians down through the centuries applied it, then it becomes deadly for Jews. You deserve everything you get because you killed Yeshua. Look at the KKK. Not that I'm recommending it. Take my word for it unless you want to investigate. One of the reasons they hate Jews is they killed Jesus. This is something that needs to be cleaned up. It's a big fat mess. It needs to be cleaned up. I don't see too many people cleaning it. It's just accepted because Augustine, he was so great. Yeah, except he took this one verse and went with it. And this was the wrong verse to go with. Let's instead go with, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. I was able to make this argument when I did my master's thesis at Trinity. And it had to do with, my master's thesis was an examination of Messianic Judaism the way it was then, which is in the baby days. We were all baby congregations, and it was a baby theological idea, a theory that Jewish people would want to worship together and stay Jews rather than to mix in with churches. And I put it as a whole appendix. It was such an important concept that I uncovered with Jewish people being very aware that they were accused of killing the Savior, and Christians thinking, it's just fine to talk about that because after all, that's the truth. How did I get onto this? Why did you let me get onto this?
I have no idea.
Oh, okay. So normal days at my house, right?
You were talking about the use of the term.
That's why I'm very happy to see
stuff.
that. Yes. Well, he's not the only one, but he's the most famous one. He's the one that most people have heard of, and he's highly admired. We all know there were anti-Semitic church fathers. Chrysostom was another one that people speak highly of, and he was horrific about Jewish people, just the worst. Martin Luther, really only a tad better. In case you want to be happy, Calvin, really not cool on Jews. So many church fathers, I don't know about church fathers, but church fathers at various time periods in history, extended time periods in history, were so wrong about the nature and the role of the Jewish people in the plan of God. Unfortunately, it's not just, who cares? Anyway, no, because people die. It's not just who cares, everybody has a different theology. No, because of this theology, people died, including relatives, John. That's why it matters, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, you say something that's not so discouraging that they want to take poison to.
Well, no. I think 2 points need to be made to be very clear concerning this text. Number one, this cannot be used as a text to force blame on the Jewish people for the death of Yeshua, and nor even for that group of 100 or less that said it there. Because as Patrice pointed out earlier, never do you read in the biblical text for concerning Rebecca that either God nor Isaac held her responsible for anything of fault or wrong concerning that situation. These readers, who would have now heard these words when they were read, after they had been written, and they were read to the groups that they were written to. As soon as they heard those words, they would have heard in the backs of their minds, just as Patrice mentioned, they would have heard the echoes of the same wording coming from Rebecca. They knew the biblical stories by heart. They would have heard those echoes right away. And they would have realized, the readers of Matthew would have realized right away, that just like Rebecca was not faulted, neither were these people faulted in me. And the prayer from just before he died, that Yeshua prayed, Father, forgive him, only reinforces that. The second thing to understand from this text is, as nice as it would be to say that this text therefore indicates that because of what was said here, it was communicating a theological truth that the Jewish people were covered by what Yeshua did, and therefore they do not need to interact specifically with Yeshua and come into a closer relationship with God through him. That does not seem to fit this text either, as nice as it would be to be able to say that. So I think both of those things need to be kept in mind as we approach this text. Did we cover it well enough?
I hope so. I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Okay. Now, if this discussion raised any questions, further questions related to this, any part of the discussion, then what you need to do, because the time has marched on, unless it's a question of clarification, what you need to do is to come back in 2 weeks to raise the question, or just so
or email us.
That's what I was going to say.
With your question,
so that we're prepared to deal with that question. So, Virginia, unless it's a quick question of clarification, we're good. All right, cool.
Yes, and you can.
I just wanted to give it another positive moment here too. Verse 19 of what you read talks about hold on, I had it here. Just while he was sitting in court, meaning the judge, his wife sent him a message: leave that innocent man alone. And today in a dream, I suffered terribly because of him. And this was the Potiphar's, or the judge's wife.
Pilate, yeah.
Pilate's wife. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another proof there that Augustine was wrong.
You think, wouldn't you?
And yeah. And how a woman did try to stand up, and who may not have even been Jewish. I don't know. I've never researched who she was or anything, or I don't even know if there is any. But there is that defense. Not only did he wash his hands, which doesn't mean that he's not innocent of the crime, but that there was someone that did stand up, other than the Jewish people who were available to stand up.
Correct.
If you want to read more about that, I think we addressed some of that in the book that we wrote a number of years ago called The Distortion. Mm-hmm. So feel free to follow through on that.
The Distortion is a short book, and it deals primarily with Mel Gibson's film, but deals with, in general, any kind of gospel presentation that is a play or a movie have specific things and mistakes in them that are perpetrated by the scriptwriter, the filmmaker, and basically not a very pretty picture. Mm-hmm. So it's not just Mel Gibson.
It's that other movie.
It's Mark Burnett's version. It's whatever version. I haven't looked at Ben-Hur lately. There was a silent version of Ben-Hur and a talking one with Charlton Heston. I have not watched that since I saw it as a child. So it could be, once again, not cool. But there are obvious things that can be changed in people's perspective, and to give them more education into how it actually went down.
And I want to say very clearly two things about this text. Number one, the text indicates, if you read it carefully, and again, the book will deal with some of it. Number one, that the Jewish people are not to blame for what happened. But if you read the text and history careful, Pilate very much is.
And Pilate's not Jewish.
And he's not Jewish.
And he hated Jews.
Nor was his wife.
No.
So he didn't pay attention to his wife, but he's certainly, his hands are not clean of blood, as the saying goes. That was a ironic, sarcastic, in fact, volatile thing that he did, just to go the Jewish people on even further. So, just so we're clear about that. All right, we need to be clear about the fact that
It's time for Havdalah.
it's time for Havdalah.
It's totally dark out.
Totally dark out. Although where Andrea's coming from, it's going to be light pretty soon.
Yeah. Yeah. And tonight, and right now on our clock, it says 8:25. But tomorrow at this time, it will be 7:25.
7:25. So we'll give you about a minute and a half to gather your Havdalah equipment, for lack of a better way to put it. We'll set ours in order here as
Yes.
well.
Turn off the fan so we can,
Yes.
so the candles won't blow wax all over.
place,
That's
yeah.
exciting.
So we'll put
All
that
right,
there.
put
So
that there.
give us just a few seconds to
Give
do
us a
that.
second, and we will welcome the week. Well, of all the weeks in the whole history of the world, this will be one of them. I think it's important to always get perspective on things like weeks. Of all the weeks in the world, this is one of them. This is, can we just tiny change scripture, not just this is the day the Lord has made, we will rejoice and be glad, but this is the week which the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. We never know what a week will bring by any means, much less a day. Okay, so he wants me to light the candles again. So Havdalah is like the nicest ceremony, and it's the easiest done at your home. Everybody enjoys it because it's over before you know it. And it leaves you in a really good state of mind for the week to come. Right. Only if the humidity allows me to light. So the candle, usually it has more than one wick for sure. It may have 7 wicks, 6 wicks, 6 wicks. For commemorating the other 6 days that are not Shabbat.
No.
We have them all.
Right here. Thank you for mentioning the bowl. Oh, okay. Here, I think we'll put the bowl over here so the bowl's over the top of the towel as well. Okay, there we go. Singing.
Let me see.
Behold.
Oh, behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and will not be afraid. For the Lord my God is my strength and my song. He also has become my salvation. For the Lord my God is my strength and my song. He also has become my salvation. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. That's Isaiah 1 and 12, 1 and 2.
Yep. And it says, behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and will not be afraid. For God, the Lord, is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. Interestingly, as we point out, that's the term Yeshua, and it has obviously deep ramifications. Therefore, with joy will we draw water out of the wells of salvation. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be upon your people. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. In the past, the Jews had light and joy, gladness and honor. So be it with us. I will lift up the cup of salvation and call upon the name of the Lord. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen, Amen. We don't drink now. Deserving of praise are you, O Lord our God. You are the ruler of the universe who creates the fruit of the vine. Now, as we say the various blessings, please remember, we say the blessing of the spices, and then we circulate them among us. We say the blessing for the light of the fire. We look at the light of the fire between the cracks of our hands, between the cracks that are between our fingers, so that we can better distinguish light from darkness. And
Baruch atah Adonai. Oh, wait.
la 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 la. Baruch atah Adonai Elohim melech haolam borei minei besamim borei minei besamim. Amen. La 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 la. Baruch atah Adonai Elohim melech haolam borei mirei haish borei mirei haish. Amen. La 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 la. Deserving of praise are you, O Lord our God. You are the ruler of the universe who creates different kinds of spices. Deserving of praise are you, O Lord our God. You are the ruler of the universe who creates the light of the fire. Deserving of praise are you, O Lord our God. You are the ruler of the universe. You've made a distinction between holy and common, between sacred and ordinary, between light and darkness, between Israel and the nations, between the seventh day and the 6 working days of the week. Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil bein kodesh lekol. Deserving of praise are you, O Lord, you distinguish between light and common. And now, we drink the wine, we use the remainder of the wine to help extinguish the light of the fire, as we did for the well. Shabbat. Bye-bye, Shabbat.
Hi, Shabbat.
And as we anticipate coming Shabbats, including the Shabbat that is the Messianic age, we sing Eliyahu Hanavi.
Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi,
Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hagiladi. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hagiladi. Bimheira Yavo Aleinu, Bimheira Yavo Aleinu, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben David. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Elijah the prophet may come quickly and bring with him Messiah, son of David. And we say then, Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Have a great week.
And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you all, near and far.
We'll see many, hopefully Friday night.
Nice to have you, by Andrea. Thank you for coming.